So I have a confession to make. Hey, what's up, Pineapple Gang? So I have a confession to make. I started a podcast earlier this year. The podcast is called Brace for Impact. Sounds a little intense, but yes, when your life is in the travel industry, it can be intense and ever-changing, and things get thrown at you left and right. Initially, this podcast was to do with my life as a flight attendant and traveling around as a flight attendant, stories and all that. But I want it to be something bigger. Now that I'm fully immersed in the travel industry, I literally eat, sleep, breathe travel now, and I am not complaining, you guys, at all. I love it. I love it. I love it. I wanted to start the podcast back up and just really have it be about the impact that travel has had on my life, the impact it has had on other people's lives, and also tie in those tips, tricks. I will be doing a specific segment of the podcast that will only be available on Facebook in my Facebook group. So go ahead, check the description below and you can see how to join. It is called the Pineapple Gang, obviously, because I'm obsessed with pineapples. And this episode is one that I had initially put out. It has to do with me being a flight attendant and flying during COVID. I thought you guys would still think that was interesting. And don't worry, I'm not talking about me being a flight attendant. If you still want those flight attendant stories, don't worry. I'm ready and happy to share the crazy experiences that I had. I just worked really hard on this first episode, so I wanted to put it out there and just know that things will be a little different moving forward with the podcast. It won't be so focused on flight attendant, but it's going to be travel. This is editing Jen. I don't know how or why this video got so blurry, but I was on my phone just trying to get it up for you guys, so I'm sorry. Also, I am planning to put it up here on YouTube and also have it available on Spotify and everywhere that you listen to podcasts. I did upload the first episode for you guys. Only a few people have been able to listen to it before I originally took it down. And I'm excited for this new chapter of the podcast. Let me know in the comments below if you enjoy this idea and this other way that we can connect about everything travel. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And here's the podcast.
So let's talk about flying during the pandemic.
The Brace for Impact podcast is about to take off.
It's time to get into airplane mode as your favorite flight attendant talks all things travel.
Now here's your host, Nonstop Jen.
Hey guys, do you remember the last time you were on an airplane? Was it today? Was it over a year ago? Well, let me tell you this, the atmosphere on an airplane has changed quite a bit. Now, I will tell you that I have been flying and working the entire duration of the pandemic, and it has been certainly a roller coaster ride. Now, I'm not going to go back to the very start of COVID. The mere thought of reliving everything from the beginning is already exhausting me. But I'm going to talk about current day. If you guys want to hear my experiences of when the pandemic started, I would be happy to do an episode on that for you. But today I'm going to talk about what is currently going on, what can you expect, how to get through some interesting struggles I'm seeing people having. So let's first talk about the atmosphere on the actual aircraft. I think the atmosphere went from a busy, bustling, emotion-filled type atmosphere to now a more sterile environment, I guess I would call it. It definitely doesn't feel like it used to. Now, this could come from having less passengers than normal, although we are seeing flight loads get back up close to normal just because there are less overall flights, or the cause could be the type of passenger on board. There are people doing more essential type travel than going on fun vacations. Now, the other thing I have noticed is the atmosphere between the passengers. I wouldn't say it was tension that you could feel because it's not negative, but it's definitely people being unsure of how to go about traveling during a pandemic. Maybe a better way to describe it is a hesitation. You can definitely sense a hesitation from the very start of the boarding process. People are really unsure of what to expect because they know things are different. And I think it's the unknown that has caused passengers to become more anxious and more nervous. I have noticed an increase in passengers having panic attacks on board or just being overall more anxious. These are some things that you can expect from the process to hopefully cut down some of that anxiety that you guys might have when you are going to the airport. Masks. Number one thing is going to be masks. Not that masks are a new concept for us, and pretty much all of last year, we have had the opportunity to become more accustomed to people wearing masks and you having to wear them when you're inside a building or around other people. What is different about it is that airline employees are going to be enforcing this rule a lot more than you guys are probably used to in your everyday life. If you're not wearing your mask properly, you will have someone telling you to please put it over your nose and mouth. If you are not wearing it and you're not actively drinking or taking a bite of your food, you will have an employee ask you to please put on your mask. Most airlines are going to have you agree to this when you purchase your ticket, but know that the FAA is in the process of making this a new rule for everyone traveling by air in the US. This means that airline employees and especially your crew are going to have to be enforcing this rule a lot more diligently because there will now be bigger consequences and probably fines that the airlines will receive if they are not doing this. That means employees and especially crew are going to have to be enforcing this. You guys, flight attendants have seen it all. We know exactly when someone is trying to cheat the system and get out of wearing their mask. Now, I think for pretty much most airlines, the only way that you can get out of this is having an approved doctor note that is also approved by the airline ahead of time. The crew will already know if this process has been done before you get onto the aircraft, so don't try to get onto the airplane and tell us that you've already had an approved doctor's note. Yes, this has happened to me before, but unlike the beginning of COVID, the airlines do now have a formal process that you have to go through. Another way that passengers like to try and trick flight attendants that they do not have to have their mask on is that they happen to be eating and drinking every time the flight attendant walks by. Now, despite how sneaky you think you are being, sitting through an entire 3-hour flight with a water bottle plastered to your lip without your mask on is not gonna work, you guys. Don't even try it. Some airlines in the US are not only kicking people off their plane, but also putting them on their do not fly list if they are caught continuously breaking the mask policy. These consequences will only get more serious as the FAA gets involved. To avoid all of this, just please take this advice from a flight attendant and leave your mask on. Some other things you can expect are to see a lot of stores closed throughout the airport. Some of them have been going out of business and others are just closed because they cannot comply with the current COVID policies. This also goes for many restaurants as well. Some of them are open for regular dining, and in some cities, the only restaurants allowed to be open are the ones in the airport. But I would not count on food being available for you. Also, please don't count on food being on the aircraft. Many airlines have taken a step back from having all their food items available for the passengers. Doing this has allowed airlines to cut down on certain costs and reduce the touch points between caterers, flight attendants, and the passengers. This isn't ideal for anyone, but I just want you guys to be prepared. Water is something that is always going to be available on the aircraft, but as far as other beverages go, it really depends on the airline. Definitely check it out on the airline's website before you travel. Coming prepared to travel during COVID is really going to cut down on your guys' stress. stress. Something else you can come to expect at the airport is going to be social distancing measures being taken at every step of your journey. Everything will be social distance, including the seats at the gatehouse and whenever you're standing in a line. I highly recommend that you look up your airline's policies about seating to know if your airline is taking into account social distancing on the aircraft. It is almost impossible for airlines to completely social distance everyone 6 feet from each other while on the plane. I have had many passengers recount their experiences on different airlines, and it seems that every airline is doing it differently. This brings me to a major struggle that I've noticed passengers having while on more crowded flights, and you guys, I have even noticed this in myself. And this struggle is being around people again. Staying at home and staying away from people has been ingrained in our brain for almost a full year now. Let's get into some galley gossip, and I will tell a story about a flight I had that made me realize it was a lot more difficult to be around a large number of people again. It's time for some galley gossip. This is the segment where we will be sharing it all. I thought it would be fun to have a point in the podcast where we share all of our crazy stories. Whether you are the passenger or a crew member, I want to hear from you. Today, I'm going to be telling you about a flight that I worked this past Christmas Eve. Not only does this story prove that karma does truly exist, but it was also the first time I realized how hard and nerve-wracking it might be to be around a large number of people again. I was working on an Airbus 321 and we almost had 200 people on board. Thinking back, I think it was probably the most amount of people I've had on board since early March of 2020. I was working a flight to one of New York's airports. But if you guys know anything about people from New York, then you know before the flight started, I was already expecting a more upfront and honest passenger group. Now, let me remind you that it was not only the first time a lot of these passengers have been flying since COVID had started, but it was also the holidays. If you are a crew member or work for an airline, then you know how much extra stress is added to a passenger during the holiday season. This extra holiday stress usually causes passengers to act one of two ways. The first way is the passenger is extremely grateful that we are working during the holiday season to get them to the destination that they need to be. The second way, the passenger is extremely irritable. And you guys, I am just being honest here. Boarding started, and as more passengers took their seats, I started getting question after question whether or not there would be any open seats that were further away from people. The flight was completely booked, so I didn't really have any options for anyone. There was one woman in particular that not only stood out to me, but she also stood out to the other passengers. At the beginning, she was upset about all the people around her, and she was making that known to everyone. After multiple attempts at getting her to trust that I was doing my best, but there just wasn't anything available at that time, she moved on to a new topic. She was now upset that she was sitting next to the lav. Oh, trust me, I am well aware that that is not a desired seat. But she was again making a point to make sure that everyone around her knew she was upset about it. I then started noticing passengers starting to shake their heads around her and glancing at me, giving me the, ma'am, what are you gonna do about this face? Her irritation started to grow, and she started yelling about how disgusted she was that there were people sitting next to her taking a poop in the shitter. Yes, she was now calling the airplane lav a shitter. At this point, I started to make my plan of action on how to settle this matter in the best way possible for everyone. I could relate to her situation, but I needed a solution that would keep every passenger happy through this 2.5-hour flight. I was making my way over to her when I saw it happen. Standing next to her was a very tall man with a very overextended backpack. He turned to ask the person behind him a question, and the backpack turned with him. Now, this backpack that was practically bursting at the seams hit her so hard that her glasses flew off her face and landed in the passenger's lap in the row behind her. I instantly moved as fast as I could to get to her to make sure she was okay. We had a new passenger on board, and her name was Karma. Since I witnessed this entire incident, I could tell that it was a pure accident on the gentleman's part. He started apologizing profusely as I got to them. My attention went straight to the woman to make sure she was okay, but that was not before she was able to give him a good old-fashioned New York talking to. I honestly have no idea how I was able to get her to calm down enough to tell me that she was okay, but I recall telling her about the time that I got a bruised eye from a backpack. As I was tending to her, her tone did start to change, and I realized that she was just a passenger who was very stressed out about getting to her family and worried about traveling during the pandemic. She was just someone who needed some extra care from me and a lot of reassurance that really seemed to help and keep her calm through the rest of the flight. In fact, after boarding, Karma never took her seat, and I was able to move this woman away from the shitter. Passengers constantly asking questions and needing issues to be fixed during the flight are not things that are out of the norm when it comes to my flight attendant job description. As I was reflecting on why I felt so stressed during that flight, I realized that I haven't been working around that many people in over 9 months. Not only did the passengers get used to having extra space around them, but I had also gotten used to having that on the plane. I also noted that I felt more pressure to be constantly washing my hands and making sure that I, along with everyone else, were properly wearing their COVID protective gear. I know it will take time for all of us to feel comfortable in crowded spaces again. To help put your mind at ease in these situations, just do what I do. Prepare and plan for your trip. The more information you know about your favorite airline's new COVID-friendly policies, the less likely there are for any surprises on your journey. We all have been going through slightly different experiences, but try to remember that every single person in the world has been affected by COVID-19, and every airline, ground crew, flight attendant, and pilot are working extremely hard to not let travel become a victim of COVID. Before I go, I want to end every podcast with a remove before flight piece of advice. In case you don't know what a remove before flight tag is, it is a safety warning often seen on removable aircraft and spacecraft components, typically in the form of a red ribbon to indicate that a device such as a protective cover or pin to prevent the movement of mechanical parts. The tag is only used when the aircraft is on the ground. If you have never noticed them, take a look around the doors during your next plane ride. But for the love of God, please don't touch them. For today's remove before flight, please leave your ego in the airport lobby. No one is ever too good for safety. Just a reminder, names and locations may have been changed to protect passenger identities. All opinions are my own and not a reflection of my employer. Bye!
Thank you for listening to the Brace for Impact podcast. It's now okay to use all electronic devices and get Jen's non-stop travel content on social media at nonstop_Jen on Instagram and Twitter.
Don't forget to join us next week. And until then, safe travels.
Thank you guys so much for listening. Let me know if there's any topics that you would like me to cover. I already have some of you letting me know some things that you want to hear about, and I'm so excited to do episodes on that. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!